Well, hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Joanna Williams, Associate Professor in School Psychology at Rutgers University. I'm very proud to be serving as a section editor for such a wonderful edited volume. I'm joined today by the stars of this section of the edited volume, our authors. They include Dr. Danny Ahui-Kapatsin Cornejo, Assistant Professor of Ethnic Studies at Diablo Valley College, Dr. Antar Tichavakunda, Assistant Professor of Race and Higher Education at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Dr. Stephanie Tolliver, Assistant Professor of Literacy and Secondary Humanities at the University of Colorado Boulder. You'll get to hear from them shortly, and you'll actually get to hear excerpts from their chapters. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our section. So storytelling is central to the larger volume. In every chapter beyond our section, authors reflect upon and tell stories about how they grow in their learning and understanding around Blackness, Indigeneity, and racialization. We asked authors to share the teachers, books, places, and lived experiences that intimately shaped how they learn to theorize, and share how that learning informs their current work and research with young people. So for me, I think our section of the book, given the focus of the larger volume, is especially important and impactful. As you'll hear, the authors take the process of storytelling even further by demonstrating the intricate connections between story and theory. More specifically, in our section, which is titled "Our Stories Are the Heart of Theory," we invite readers to consider storytelling as a way of making theory in the world. In all three chapters, authors center the stories that animate their own theorizing. By sharing the stories that inform their work, the authors that you'll hear from today also make room for more capacious understandings of not only what counts as theory, but also who can make theory. This idea is deeply embedded in their chapters, and I hope the authors don't mind, but I've pulled a quote from each of your chapters that really, I think, captures the essence of this idea. So Danny shares with us, quote, "Our stories are grounded in struggle and context. They are the ground from which we emerge and the ground whose nutrients feed the substance of our beings." Antar writes, quote, "Stories help us understand our relation to theories and concretize the abstract theories we read and create. Stories breathe life into theoretical propositions, animating theory so readers might better understand it by seeing theory in action." And Stephanie says, quote, "I sang myself diamond and began to see that my work was not to contort, to bend the wills of townsfolk who wished me dead. My work was to become a story listener, to help other stories like me make it through this world without bending, without breaking. We deserve to be whole." As you can see from those quotes, there's a lot of really rich and valuable storytelling and theorizing in our section of the book. And I'm excited now to turn it over to Danny, whose chapter in the volume is called "Our Stories Are the Heart of Theory, Walking the Mosaic Path and Exorcising the Ghosts of Missionaries Past." Danny.
Iyo siminobe no tegua baagikia tereraguada o posurawa doeme teguima. Mari lamien, qualitonali ilhuid nehua no toka. Danny Ahui-Kapatsin Cornejo. I introduce myself in my maternal language, the Teguima Opata Nation of Central Sonora, my paternal language of the Picunche people of Colchagua, Chile, and in my adopted language of Nahuatl, Central Mexico. Piece I'm going to share today just as a form of introduction, I'll say that at the heart of every story, at the heart of every theory lies a story. Stories guide a relationship to theory, which inversely helps us make sense of the personal narratives, as well as their connections with and or contradictions to broader histories of violence and resistance. My piece consists of two parts. The first part is called "The Broken Clay Pot," gathering fragments and building a mosaic path. And this section grapples with the ceremonial co-creation of knowledge, that pushed me to indigenize my curricula and develop what I call the theory of the mosaic path, which hopefully I'll talk about in the question and answer section. The second section of my chapter is entitled Exploring the Haunted Archives, Exercising the Ghosts of Missionaries Past, and this documents the application of the mosaic path through my ongoing journey of reclaiming and renewing my people's language, the Teguima Opata language of Central Sonora. So I'm going to read a passage from Exploring the Haunted Archive, Exercising the Ghosts of Missionaries Past. While lost among the stacks of books at Shields Library at UC Davis, I realized the archives were haunted. In these stacks, I happened upon a copy of the Art of the Teguima language, vulgarly called Opata, composed by Father Natal Lombardo in 1702. I took the book off the shelf. The title spoke volumes. On the one hand, the author, Father Natal Lombardo, seemed to hold a reverence and respect for my people's language, acknowledging that Teguima was one language among the triad of languages collectively known as Opata, which include Teguima, Eudeve, and Hova. Within the title, he insisted on not miscategorizing the language. I understood that Lombardo's grammar contained a wealth of sacred language, grammatical rules, greetings, lists of colors, plants, animals, places, directions, kinship terms, etc. Fragments of a language considered extinct by Western scholars and considered deeply endangered by our people. On the other hand, I understood that the grammar that I held in my hand had been used to train Spanish missionaries in the enslavement, missionization, assimilation, and the elimination of my ancestors. How does one begin to engage with the haunted archive when the trauma of opening intergenerational wounds is inescapable? How does one begin to commune with the unknown ancestral specter? I checked the book out, put it in my backpack, and left the library. Lombardo's grammar sat in my home unopened for weeks. The specter of the archive, as well as the magnitude of beginning to learn the Teguima language, loomed heavy. Exorcising the ghosts of Natal Lombardo was no easy task. Lombardo's grammar was explicitly used to assimilate and missionize Opatan people into Christian beliefs, as well as to enslave our people within the feudal encomienda, repartimiento, and reducción systems of the day. The clearest example of Opatan assimilation and missionization into Christianity is expressed linguistically through Lombardo's emphasis on teaching missionaries religious phrases. The sheer volume of religious phrases presented in Lombardo's work are indications of the missionary ideology and purpose behind the creation of his grammar. Phrase 1. I judge that your father did not hear mass. Amo nemasi, si ai misa viziera. Phrase 2. Tomorrow we will go to Oposuda to hear mass. Chia oposudawa misa vizidoni tai yasak. Phrase 3. Having heard mass, I returned. Misa ne vitsuar no ue. These examples clearly demonstrate the connection between Lombardo's grammar and missionization efforts. Beyond assimilation and missionization, the project of enslavement through a feudal encomienda system is expressed linguistically through Lombardo's emphasis on providing missionaries with commands that get people working under the threat of violence. Phrase 1. I thought you had to plow. Emene mavu guarea kori edare. Phrase 2. The father said you had whipped that boy. Para eme eureki tesa chita beguia kai thiuie. Phrase 3. I command you to whip. Himanado. The ideology of assimilation, missionization, and enslavement is expressed through the content and purpose of Lombardo's grammar, where strong emphasis is placed on language that instructs people to participate in Christianity, work in the fields, police one another through capital punishment, and ultimately ensure that Opata people understand that the threat of violence is imminent. These conditions contributed to an ongoing genocide of the Opata people, beginning with the arrival of Diego de Guzman in 1530, the subsequent resistance of Opata peoples until the early 1700s, the eventual grudging alliances formed with the Spanish between 1700 and the Mexican independence, and wars in alliance with, as well as against, the Mexican nation state prior to the Mexican Revolution in 1910. Given this context, my language learning paradox became crystal clear. To participate in a process of Opatan language reclamation, I would have to engage with the writings of the missionary responsible for extreme violence against my people. To make the language reclamation process sustainable and regenerative over time, I would have to find a way to exercise the missionary from the study of the Teguima language. Thank you all.
Thank you, Danny. I've had the opportunity to read your chapter several times, but something about hearing it and hearing the language, given the importance of language there, just made it especially powerful. So thank you so much. And now we get to hear from another one of our wonderful authors. Antar's chapter is called "Your Theory is Too Small, Beyond Stories of the Hunt." Antar.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. I'm just really happy to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, but I'm going to read a segment of my chapter and kind of like, what inspired me to write this chapter. So I begin every talk by saying I'm a product of DC public schools. I mentioned that because when you say you're from DC public schools, you get a lot of different responses, right? And that really shaped traversing DC, navigating the 70 bus, the stories I could tell about navigating the 70 bus, the stories I could tell about getting to the magnet school that I went to, right? The stories I could tell about me feeling super left behind a lot of my classmates at the elite university I went to. That really kind of shaped who I became as an education scholar. I actually majored in education studies as an undergrad as well. So stories are really central to how I view theory in general. My research agenda largely looks at, kind of like the sociology of race in higher education. And I'm really interested in Black student life in particular. This particular piece, it kind of begins with the West African proverb, right? So I say that my theoretical journey can be understood in relation to the West African proverb: until the lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. And that in so many ways is like kind of like the base of this chapter if you read it. So just want to keep that in mind. And this thing about theory in general, I remember I was leaving a conference and I was speaking with another professor and she complimented me on one of my papers. And I'm like, oh, wow, thank you so much. And she's like, yeah, you have quite the theoretical chops. And this is like my second year as an assistant professor. And I'm like, wait, what? And she's like, you're a theorist. Like, you're a theorist. Like, that paper is theory. And even though it was a completely theoretical paper, it wasn't until she said that I started thinking about myself as a theorist, right? So in this paper, I'm really trying to engage with why I had trouble thinking about myself as a theorist. And lastly, before I read a bit of this passage, I just want to take a second and thank you, Dr. Joanna Williams, for looking at my paper and really pushing it to be better. And I think it's also just powerful for us all to be here, for you all to see us, see our faces. I teach a course called On Theory, and I think it's so important for us to see who's behind these theories that we're talking about. So without further ado, I'll just read a little segment of my chapter. I tell students they are theorists. I do this in part because no one told me that I could be a theorist. No one told me as a student I was already theorizing. I want better for the future. I want burgeoning Black scholars, people of color more broadly, and other disenfranchised groups to have bigger ideas for theory and for themselves as thinkers. From my experience as a fifth grader to struggling through doctoral coursework as a first year to expanding my research on Black student life, how I view theory continues to evolve. Of note is my belief that theory work is lineage work. As such, I join a lineage of scholars troubling, challenging, expanding, and refusing dominant understandings of theory. In this tradition, I push for a more expansive view of theory to understand and support Black communities. I'm a theorist. I began calling myself a theorist without qualifiers during my third year as an assistant professor. I was inspired by the observation made by Joy James, who pointed out that white men do not title their works white masculinist theory. Yet, I hesitate to call myself a theorist. It feels audacious. Despite my research being theoretically driven, publishing purely theoretical pieces, and introducing theories to the field of higher education, part of me still hesitates to call myself a theorist. This hesitation comes from the education system I traversed. My view of theory, largely because of graduate school, was too small. As I highlight throughout the chapter, storytelling is central to how I view theory. I mention stories about the context of how I learned theory because theorizing does not occur in a vacuum. We are not empty vessels imbibing the knowledge and theories in the work we read. We become theorists in the crucibles of life. The structural oppressions, or lack thereof, we make lives around, within, and against shapes the theories we gravitate towards and create. Stories are central to theory, but also to research in general. And in what follows, I tell a story of how I came to view theory. Elementary school, when right answers are wrong. I have passed, failed, and muddled through countless quizzes and exams. Most I don't remember. Quizzes only induce anxiety. Yet one quiz I took as a fifth grader was transformative. This 10-question true or false quiz on a half of a college rule sheet of paper changed how I viewed education and inequality. The change in my worldview was neither immediate nor drastic, yet 2 decades later, I still reflect upon this incident. My class was probably 90% Black. My teacher, whom I still regard as one of my favorite teachers, was a white woman. The quiz I referred to was a unit about antebellum US history. I can't remember any other question, but I do remember one. Was slavery necessary for the South's economy? I scribbled F for false and waited for the next question. Easy. We traded and graded. All right, for number 7, was slavery necessary for the South's economy? A Black boy, a classmate, raised his hand. True. Correct. The South's economy needed slavery. Students pumped their fists, and I could hear a chorus of my classmates saying yes across the room, celebrating the right answer. I was upset. I got mad I got the question wrong, but something else was eating at me. How could anyone under any circumstance justify needing slavery? I'm not sure what led me to marking the answer false. Perhaps it was my father, a man who changed his last name from Brown to T'Challa, a Shona name meaning we shall conquer them. Perhaps it was my mother, who instilled pride in my being, took me to museums every weekend, and assured I associated Blackness with fullness. Perhaps it was my grandmother, who was born in Mississippi and worked as a docent in the American History Museum section of the Great Migration. Because of my worldview, I could only answer my teacher's question with a response that affirmed Black life, even if that answer was wrong. My experience taking the quiz can be understood through the hunter-lion proverb. Indeed, critical theorists and those from disenfranchised communities find inspiration in the proverb, reflecting upon their lion status in a hunter-dominated society. Through this proverb, one's gaze is averted to the oppressive and limiting logics underpinning Western dominant understandings of theory and the academy. The lion story becomes synonymous with counter-narratives. In reflection, this was a moment I began to question truths, worldviews, and theories that made me out to be less than human. And I'll stop there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Antar. Again, hearing these, hearing you each breathe life into your chapters makes them ever more powerful for me as a listener and learner. And I appreciate that all of you, and Antar in particular, you're creating this sort of bridge as I see it. So I think about this and the impact it could have for people who are, traversing graduate school and making the idea of theory more accessible. So thank you very much. We will continue on hearing from our third author, Stephanie. The title of your chapter is, excuse me, An Afrofuturist Dreams of Black Liberations, Disentangling Blackness from Fatalism.
Hi, everyone. I am Stephanie Tolliver. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, and my research often centers three main foci. So one is to examine how Black youth use speculative text to discuss and challenge their experiences with social injustice. Another is to consider how intersecting oppressions infiltrate literacy education and how English educators must use their imaginations to dream of multiple ways to challenge injustice in schools. And the third is to demonstrate how Black people use speculative storytelling to metaphorically describe modern and historical anti-Blackness and to dream of worlds and futures in which Black people are free. And I name those things because I feel like those pieces of my research show why my chapter is very speculative and very tied to this metaphorical thing that I was in the space of during the writing. And so I figured that was really important to tell. In the chapter, I creatively build on Isaiah Lavender's concepts of the Black networked consciousness and the intergenerational feedback loop to detail my educational experiences as a Black girl in elementary, secondary, and post-secondary schools, and to describe how I relied upon Afrofuturist dreamers, family members, Black scholars, and ancestors to navigate an anti-Black school system. In sharing my story, my goal was just to help educational stakeholders to consider their role as story listeners and those who are responsible for listening to and engaging with Black girl stories. So without much more introduction, here's an excerpt from my chapter, An Afrofuturist Dreams of Black Liberation, Disentangling Blackness from Fatalism. I'm not sure where I began. I did not exist, and then I was formed, molded out of history, the current moment, and the future. I was a night child, given breath at the darkest point of the evening, refusing light, refusing a welcome where darkness did not surround me. I was carved from the lips of a griot who foretold of futures I was responsible for, futures I would facilitate into being. She beat the tempo of my existence on her drum, spoke the words that gave me life, pushed my being to the ears of listeners willing to engage in the work of story. The story listeners clapped loudly, welcoming me into this world, appreciative of my existence, of the work that I was meant to do. The griot's umber lips wrinkled at the corners of her aged face because her work was done. But my work and the work of the story listeners had just begun. I didn't know I'd be born again so many times after that first moment when story filled my lungs. Billions of births over centuries, beat from drums displayed in portraits dispersed through song, inked on paper and housed in Black bodies. I lived many lifetimes. And yet, with each rebirth, I am reminded of my important position as the link in the networked consciousness. Listen, the work is about to begin. My most recent journey began over 30 years ago. I began as clay, molded to the specifications for a being deemed Black and girl, programmed for survival through codes of silence and obedience. Forged with the memories of grandmother, grandfather, mother, other mother, I was uploaded into this brain, this body. I suppose I was child because I had no autonomy, no control over my identity or who I wanted to be. I was pink and yellow and purple. I was gendered dreams fulfilled. I was youth, supposed innocence mapped over my body for all to see. I soon learned, however, that childhood was a fallacy, a glamour used to hide the perceived adult beneath. I embodied child, and childhood was intimately foregrounded by a loving family, and yet the world outside decided that this body didn't constitute childhood. According to the world, I needed less comfort, less nurturing, less support. According to society, I already knew about adult topics and sex, so there was no point in bestowing the honor of innocence upon me. Childhood was a lie, an intangible thing I consistently reached for but never grasped, an ethereal specter that followed some young people but not me. These ghosts of innocence journeyed toward whiteness, the light in the darkness, the virtue of the blameless. Childhood required a magical dispersal of my culture, home, and self, a scattering of Black and girl. Childhood required the erasure of the Blackness that consumed my body. Childhood demanded the quarantining of personhood so as not to scare white teachers who chose to see monster instead of girl. When I began, I was celebrated. When I was reborn as this child, I was girl, I was monster, I was both. You're a girl, so you can't play sports. The boys down the street jeer when I attempt to play with them. Grass stains from makeshift football fields and scraped knees from concrete basketball courts proved otherwise. And yet, what does it mean to exist in this girl body? This contained being who presents as feminine, who loves the game but hates the stereotypes. I was an elementary school child, not child, who could not dictate her youth nor her interests. I was a young monster who was not welcomed amongst the local townsfolk. You're Black, so you can't like anime, the white boy says as he prepares his inquisition. Name 8 characters from Dragon Ball. What happened in the last Inuyasha episode? If you're such a fan, name 5 anime and their main characters. I mean, what do Black girls know about nerd stuff anyway? I could have responded, answered his questions in order to leave him probing behind the stock narratives he's always known about those who look like me. I could have beat him with my retorts, made him reconsider the ousting of people from nerd communities based solely on racial and gendered visages, but silence is often a balm in the face of fear. I was a middle school child, not child, who was relegated to certain stories, specific narratives that forced my existence into a rigid box. I was a middle school monster, forced to run away from community for fear of white children with pitchforks. Why don't you write something more real? The high school teacher argues as she grades my most recent narrative essay. I know I write well because I was birthed from narrative, storied into existence. And yet the teacher doesn't want my story. She continues, you know, more historically accurate, something that talks about your life. The issue is that the essay is one of the realest narratives I've written, pages filled with the lore and mythology, the everyday existence of my family and my ancestors. I know what she means, though. She wants the pain of enslavement, the trauma of forced separation, rape and servitude, and the physical and psychological violence that surrounds tales of Black life in the United States. She doesn't want my dragons, my gods and goddesses, my tales of agency and heroism, my stories of Black everyday life in the Rust Belt. She wants my pain. She wants more of her story, not mine. I was a high school child, not child, whose stories were not her own. I was a monster, and the tales of my horror surrounded me as the teacher couldn't see that my existence was so much more than the negative stories she tells herself to maintain her savior complex. You are a diamond, a person with multiple facets who must let all aspects of your being shine brightly. You must embrace who you are, whoever you choose to be, my mother tells me. She sees me, recognizes the person that loves anime, that craves Broadway musicals, that appreciates existence beyond the confines created by the world around her. She knows her prayer for my life is essential to my growth. She engages in supplication to a being I'm not sure exists to secure my life on this planet. I hear her pleas, her requests, her demands that this world be better than it was before, than it was when she was a little Black girl monster, child, not child. I hear a twinge of doubt, though. She knows this prayer may go unanswered because she is mother to a monstrous child. She is protector of beings who scare. And I wonder, do the gods hear the prayers of the monster's mother? Do they hear her when she worries, when she cries? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I remember the first time I read the first draft of your chapter, and literally the words that came to my mind were, this is a gift. It felt like you had given me a gift just with your writing. And hearing it now, it still feels that way. I'm so glad that your chapter, like you are a writer, and to have your chapter in this volume feels really special. So thanks to each of you for sharing in your own voice a piece of your chapter. And now we've got time just to talk a little bit more about kind of the, who you are as scholars and people. All of the chapters across the volume really get at some aspect of the author's journey. So, and often that's in relation to the academy. So your journey through graduate school or in academic spaces, including libraries. So I want to throw out a question. Imagine that you were potentially not in the position of author. You have to sort of imagine, a clone of yourself or something like that who's written this chapter. And you are given your own chapter to read in the early years of your graduate training. How do you think you would have reacted to your chapter if you had read it when you were sort of in the early part of your journey in the academy? Stephanie, I see you're unmuted. Would you like to start?
Oh yeah, I just unmuted because we were going to have a conversation, and so I feel like doing the stop and the start with the sound is a little awkward for that. But I'll start. I think to read any of our chapters, just hearing them today again, so I heard them a couple months ago, but hearing them again today, I think it's a giving of permission that I don't think that I had when I started my doctoral program. I remember often being told like that my writing was too narrative and that I should like get more into the traditional style of academic writing. And like, you got to get to the point, like, you don't need to build, like, I'm a world builder for even academic articles. And I'm like, no, I must set the scene because that's the narrative part of my just self and being. And I was consistently told no. Like, that is not academic writing. You have to like write it in this particular way. You cannot change anything. And so for me, seeing these chapters when I was a student would have helped me to give myself permission to be who I am. Like, I'm a narrative writer. I love narrative. I love writing. I've been writing stories since I was a kid. And I pushed that away because everyone said that's not academic enough. And these would have told me that it is. And we have to consider academic for whom. And yeah, it just made me think about like so much of my history has been storytelling. So much of what my mom would see things going on in the world, and then she would tell me that through story. She was doing research by watching what's happening out there and then telling it through story. But I didn't see that as an option before. And I would have loved to have this now to see it as a possibility.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I completely agree. If I could gotten any of these chapters, I think my trajectory would have looked a little different. I mean, I think I would have been more confident as a, just as a scholar, whatever that means, right? As a first year graduate student, because I was lost my first year. Oh my gosh, like I was in these, these little forums talking about stuff, and I try to include my little, oh yeah, this happened to me when I was in, a student in DCPS, and now as a teacher in DCPS. I think that's a useful vantage point. And then, my professors wouldn't appreciate that. Well, like, what does X scholar say about this? What does Y scholar? Da, da, da. I was like, oh, so this isn't. So I didn't have like the language. I thought I didn't have the language. So I think it's super fitting and thinking about Dr. Cornejo's work in like language and grammar, right? I didn't think that my language, my grammar, what I thought as a theoretical resource was good enough. That's why, I especially love what Dr. Tolliver is saying about too, because in so many ways it's already in us, and it's a reminder. I would have loved to have that reminder, that affirmation, that paradigm shift that, oh, it's here, it's just, am I bold enough to like really stand on it all 10 toes? This is what I'm doing, So in so many ways, my theoretical journey has almost been coming back to me, really finding my voice that's been there all along, but having the confidence to really sit in it. And had I had this from the beginning, I mean, it would have been, things happen for a reason. I think I would have felt way more comfortable to have these chapters and these scholars as my like intellectual big homies,
Yeah, thank you to both of you. I deeply moved by both of your works. And as a young person, I was often reminded that Western knowledge systems exist only in the brain, and they're not connected to the heart. They're not connected to our broader spirits. They're not connected to holistic knowledge systems. And that disconnect was always incredibly hard for me to reconcile. And so my hope is that pieces like this will give students permission to connect their head knowledge to their heart knowledge and speak more powerfully from that place. If we think about some of the powerful writers that have deeply impacted me, whether it's Eduardo Galeano, Deborah Miranda, Maya Angelou, they write from that place of holistic knowledge, of story, of head connecting to the heart. Because when you do that, and when you do it through story, then people are able to connect to the content from a heart place. And so my hope is that one of my favorite quotes from Eduardo Galeano is, he says, "I'm not asking you to describe the rain falling the night the archangel arrived. I'm demanding that you get me wet. Make up your mind, Mr. Writer, and for once in your life, be the flower that smells rather than the chronicler of the aroma. There's not much pleasure in writing what you live. The challenge is to live what you write." Okay, I didn't read Eduardo Galeano until I was a senior in high school. And my pops handed me the book. He's like, and I think it was actually a punishment. He was like, you know, you messed up. You're going to read this as a punishment. And I read that book, Open Veins of Latin America. And it was the first time that the content of a volume connected with my life experience. It was the first time I was able to read myself into the text. Oh, you know, my family is here because of the US neoliberal project in Latin America, which exiled my father, which brought us to this country. And, you know, to have that experience senior year of high school, as opposed to throughout your K-12 education, in my view, I'm glad that I had the experience, but it's too little too late. You know, that should have been my experience throughout. And so my hope is that young people that engage with these works are able to connect to it from a heart place, are able to connect our stories to their own stories, read themselves into the text, and empower themselves to as my colleague said, see themselves as theorists. And so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I just want to open it back up to kind of build on the same question, but you heard from Dr. Cornejo, who talked about hope for potential young scholars and readers of this work. So I don't know if the rest of you want to speak to kind of who you hope will read your chapter when you think about your hope for, you know, impact or how it's received. Do you have thoughts about that as well?
Okay, okay. I think I have two paths. So one, I hope advisors and chairs of doc students, grad students read these things, because I think that one of the biggest obstacles for me was not my chair. My chair was actually pretty awesome about it, but like for others, it was, well, my chair said I have to wait. I can't do this work now. I must wait until later. And then when I get, I don't know, associate or full professor, then I can go back to my storying roots or something like that. And I think that having, one of the issues is they don't see it. And so they don't know it's possible. And so I think that I would love for advisors, chairs, people who are mentoring graduate students to read this, to be like, oh, it is possible, and here's how. Here is this book, here is something I'm learning from it, like that type of thing. And I also think that I would love to have, like, yes, like grad students, but I also think that, like, the thing with, for me, academic research is it's so often boring. And I don't know another word for it, but it's boring and it's static and it's stale. And when I read or hear these chapters, I am not bored. I am enjoying it. I am learning. And it's deep theoretical and methodological work that's happening, but not written in such a way that my eyes are glazing over by the time I get to the method section. And so I think that even like high school students could read these chapters easily and enjoy it versus reading some of the other articles that I have often also written. And so I think that, like, I would love to see folks who the Academy deems not academic to read and also write in similar ways.
Yeah, retweet, RT, the writing being boring. And yes, I have a few of those papers because, you know, the game is a game. But in doing so, you know, like that's part of it, right? Like, I want people to be able to look at my writing in this piece and be like, okay, he's writing like this. And he also has this stuff that the academy or whatever appreciates in the language or grammar that is often put on a pedestal, right? Like, and it's not to say that I can do both. I appreciate like writing like this more. Like, I think this is more true to who I am. So if that, as Dr. Tolliver was saying, like kind of convinces an advisor or a faculty member to be like, okay, maybe there is something here. You know, if these scholars are doing it, why can't these first year students do it? I think that would be great. But, you know, I think all of us in some ways, forgive me if I'm overstepping, I think all of us were writing for us we're writing for. And I think, you know, Dr. Williams brought this up in one of my drafts. He was like, imagine that the author is the reader is a friendly reader, right? I'm so used to writing defensively. I'm so used to thinking about reviewer two going to say this, somebody going to say this. I'm so used to writing defensively, but like, I feel like I was free to talk to, people who like an already engaged audience, so I was trying to write this for us. I hope people who, feel out of place in graduate programs read this work and find some type of solace or home place, even for a little bit, and I hope that more scholars in general are just more bold in their writing and, write dangerously, like, I don't know. I want people to read my stuff and be like, oh, he was, he wrote this and you could tell it was love in this, right? Like this just thing with Dr. Cornell was saying about like, just your heart place, right? Like I want people to really see that. And so much of academic writing, as Dr. Tolliver was saying, is just you don't feel the heart, and it's just, yeah. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, so much of that. Sorry, Dr. Cornejo, do you want to add on to that?
Well, I just wanted to reemphasize when I can tell when academics aren't writing from the heart. I feel like I can tell because it comes out as boring, static, stale, and dry, and students receive it that way. And that's also the way we've been trained. And so, how do we begin to disrupt that process? I really like what Dr. Antar said. And sorry, I'm calling you by your first name, but I'm gonna go with that because I don't want to mispronounce your last name. But writing defensively, I wrote this article while finalizing my dissertation, and there was just they were diametrically opposed in the approach. Dissertation was completely defensive. What do I need to do in order to get this through? And I'm actually glad that I did them both at the same time because this chapter allowed me an avenue. It was a liberatory avenue. Say, okay, I don't have to write defensively all the time. I can actually speak from this place of heart. And even more so, just speaking to Dr. Tolliver's work, I hear the poetry in your work, particularly when you read it out loud. And to me, that's incredibly encouraging and inspiring. Like, oh, so, how can I make my writing more poetic? Because, coming from oral traditions, coming from holistic oral traditions, things are more memorable when they rhyme, when they're poetic, when they're sung. And so, why wouldn't we apply those teachings to our own writing to make them more memorable, to make them resonate with people in deeper ways?
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. A couple of things, just a couple of quick comments that came to mind as I was listening to each of you, and then I'll throw out maybe one more question. One, Dr. Tolliver, you mentioned, young people being able to read these chapters. As I was reading these chapters and others in the volume, I thought about specific young people who it was sort of like, I wish you had this, like, I wish this for you in your, adolescent life. Because I think the way I think, Dr. Cornejo, I wrote down the way that you might have an opportunity to read yourself into the text, I think is really clear. And also to see not the story that, say, the K-12 system is often creating for you or narrating for you. So to me, that's really critical. The other piece as well, in that the way that you engage us as writers, for me, it actually makes me want to read more of your academic work. So as I have this long running list of things that I want to now read because I want to know more about you and your thinking, and your expertise and your content areas too. So something about these chapters, I think, invite us to really kind of want to extend our connection to you and your thinking. So I appreciate that as well. And maybe we can build on that a little bit. And you may remember, I don't know how long ago it was, but in the original call for proposals, we asked potential authors a couple of questions. We asked, what do you wish to see more scholars in your field achieve? And if you can make a change to your field, what would that change be? So I wonder if you might, going beyond how we might use these chapters, but thinking about the broader fields that you're in, where do you sort of locate this kind of work, or just your general thoughts about changes that you'd like to kind of see or aspire towards in your field? Anybody want to start?
I feel like one of y'all should start since I've started the other ones.
I'll start. I honestly, I want to see more work like Dr. Tolliver and Dr. Cornell's chapters, right? Like, this is the work that gets me going. Like, I just wrote in the chat, like, I'm ready to write right now. Like, I'm ready to put on my cozy hoodie and just start writing in this empty apartment. Like, I'm just, because that's what good writing does. I think it just motivates you. It motivates you to do good work with people in mind, with the people you care about in mind. But I don't know, I want to see more, like I said, just risk. I mean, it shouldn't be a risk, but more beautiful writing. Like, I mean, and I don't mean, even when I'm reviewing stuff, I don't even comment as much on style, but like, I want people to care about the craft of writing in addition to research, right? Like, yes, you did axial coding and coded this many ways, da 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 da. But like, do you care about the sentences that you're writing? You know what I mean? Like, if you're doing qualitative research, would like your participants be like, wow, like you really did justice to like my story? You know, I want people, I don't know, I want people to just care more about the, not to say they don't care, but like just, I try to really take care of my sentences, you know? And I want to see more like fiction, you know, like just speculative work, as Dr. Tolliver was talking about. Like, I pitched an idea to a press, and I was going to try to do something similar to what Derek Bell does and a lot of his work with his chronicles, Face at the Bottom of the Well. And the editor said, yeah, we actually don't do any type of fiction, you know? And I was like, dang, I was like, so Derek Bell could have published here, you know? So that's, you know, that's just stifling. And that work is, I don't know. I remember my students and we appreciate his chronicles oftentimes more than his like more like disciplined work, right? Yeah, I'll stop there.
So I just want to piggyback on that because, so my first book, it's Recovering Black Storytelling and Qualitative Research. And the majority of the book is a sci-fi novel. And it was based on my dissertation. And I had sent it to, I want to say 7 or 8 different academic presses who said the same exact thing. Like, they were like, oh, that's such a cool idea. We don't publish fiction. And I'm like, I had all of the pieces, the method, the theory, the findings, all of it was there. And they're like, nah. And so it wasn't until Rutledge, I had talked to Kakali Bhattacharya, and she was like, nah, we got this. But it took so many of them being like, oh, no, we don't publish fiction. I'm like, this is research, though. It's just written in a way that's different. It's written in a way that the 8th grade girls that I work with read my whole dissertation. Like, and I don't know many times where that happens, but like that, the no's was a lot, and it was really hard. And so when I think about what I wish to see more yeses to work that aligns with the histories and cultures of people that were not welcomed in academia when academia first began. And I think that like we're so held on to a tradition that was formed before we even got here, and not realizing that so many different peoples and cultures did research differently before academia in this current form even existed. And so I wish to see more yeses to different ways of presenting our work, ways that align with who we are. Like more fiction, more poetry, more art, more dance, more songs, more discussions and orality. Like it can't all just be in that one way, because I think that what that does is it stilts the work that we're doing. It diminishes the amount of reach or impact that we can possibly have because people aren't reading and engaging with it in the same ways. And so I think that that's what I would want for the field. And when I say the field, I mean like education, but also beyond. Like there are some, like I learned from more stories about the medical field than I learned from some of their research papers on the medical field. And so I'm just like, I think that we definitely need more narrative, more story in academic research, because I think that we could do so much more if we did.
Yeah, I would love to piggyback on that point of fiction that both of you spoke to. You know, I as I was finalizing my dissertation, the only external literature I engaged with during that time that wasn't dissertation related was fiction, and it was specifically science fiction and fantasy written by authors of color, Black and Indigenous authors of color. That's my world. And I may be wrong, but I believe I've probably read all of those offerings more than once. I may be wrong, but the vast majority, and I continue to look, I feel like I've read most Black, Brown, Indigenous sci-fi writers, and that's unfortunate. There should be, I shouldn't be able to read all of those authors. There should be more than I could ever wrap my arms around. And so, you know, I would hope for that. I also like what Dr. Tolliver had to say about expanding our epistemological framework to, you know, see knowledge within dance, song, okay? Because in BIPOC communities, you know, oral histories are passed on through dance and song. Stories are told through dance and song. Our bodies are archives for this knowledge. And if you're not recognizing and appreciating that knowledge, you're cutting yourself off from profound sources of knowing and understanding. And so really understanding that in or the importance and validity of that. I reside discursively in the intersection of Native studies, comparative ethnic studies, and education. And in a nutshell, you know, I would love to see the field of Native American studies and Indigenous studies be more hemispheric and indeed more global. I would love to understand what Native studies looks like in Africa and in South Asia, and start to see those cross-cultural dialogues in more meaningful ways. And, you know, I think the same goes for any of the 4 subfields of ethnic studies, whether it's Latinx, Chicano studies, you know, Asian American studies. I would love to see it outside of the context of the US in dialogue with international. And in doing so, the breakdown of academic silos that are either self-imposed or created within universities. You know, this is my field, and you know, I'm not this. Don't come in here. You know, the defensiveness around fields. Don't come in here. Leave me. You know, you're not an expert over here, so we can't talk. I've run into that more than I would like, and I would love to see that disrupted. But then I think even prior to my work as a scholar, you know, I've been an educator since 2004, not an educational scholar. I'm talking in the classroom, K through 5, you know, high school, up to the university level. And in my view, the field of education specifically has consciously and or unconsciously internalized so many aspects of colonialism, neoliberalism, and capitalism, whether it's just the inherent hierarchy, whether it's the pay inequality you see, the overwork, the underpay, the high turnover of teachers, kind of these extractivist approaches to educators. How can we extract, and this is, you know, patriarchy, the fixation on data-driven instruction, you know, buzzwords like, you know, buzzwords without any substance behind them. There's like a new buzzword every year. And then the affiliated innovation fatigue that comes along with those buzzwords. And Also, just I think the last thing I'll say about the field of education specifically is I think there's just this need to, we got to fix it now. We got to fix it this year. It's got to be, here's the approach that's going to fix it this year, as opposed to a more indigenized approach, which is, multi-generational, intergenerational, and strategic. No, you're not going to disrupt the structures of colonialism in one generation. It's multi-generational. It's people standing on each other's shoulders over the course of multiple generations.
Thank you. This is a really, I think, rich and powerful discussion that extends, I think, beyond the chapters themselves to think about the larger goals of the volume, really as kind of an intervention, if you will. So I want to take a moment to appreciate the William T. Grant Foundation for supporting this work. And having been, someone who's received funding from WT Grant, and, I know a lot of other grantees, I have this hope that people like me who are, sort of trained in psychology or other traditional social sciences really read and reread this volume, because I think it brings so much depth and so much really critical value and knowledge to the field that has the potential to kind of change people's paths and trajectories in important ways. So I appreciate that WT Grant has provided resources to create space for this volume and to create space for all of your voices to be heard, not just in writing, but also, here in a webinar. So if you're watching this webinar, take some time to go and read and reread the chapters, and then come back and you can sort of, listen to the authors. That's again, a gift that you get to hear authors reading their own work. So I also want to thank, of course, Dr. Eve Tuck and Dr. Wayne Yang for their vision for this work and for getting the resources to kind of push it forward. And for all the folks behind the scenes who are helping to create the webinar and who have really, I think, created this beautiful process that allowed the book to come to light, for it will be in a few short months. I want to thank each of our authors. So Dr. Danny Ahui Kapotsin Cornejo, Dr. Antar T. Chavakunda, and Dr. Stephanie Tolliver for taking the time to create this important bridge between story and theory that allows us to really feel like it's something we can do and see and live and experience. So thank you so much for your contributions. And I want to close, actually, Danny, people probably by now have realized that the title of your chapter is also the title of our section. So thank you for that. I want to close by quoting you again, something that you have in your chapter really, I think, kind of brings some of this home. So I'll close on a quote from you that says, "When we remember that our stories are the heart of theory, our knowledge has no ledges." Thank you so much, everyone.